Ploughed fields and a suspicious hamlet prevented his nearer access. And after a time there came boards, great boards with red letters that barred him in every direction. He could not read what the letters said, out of bounds, but in a little while he understood. He was often to be seen in those days by the railway passengers sitting, chin on knees, perched up on the down hard by the Thursley chalk pits, where afterwards he was set working. The train seemed to inspire a dim emotion of friendliness in him, and sometimes he would wave an enormous hand at it, and sometimes give it a rustic, incoherent hail. "Big," the peering passengers would say, "one of these Boom children. They say, sir, quite unable to do anything for itself, little better than an idiot in fact, and a great burden on the locality. Parents quite poor, I'm told. Lives on the charity of the local gentry." Every one would stare intelligently at that distant, squatting, monstrous figure for a space. "Good thing that was put a stop to," some spacious thinking mind would suggest. "Nice to have a few thousand of them on the rates, eh?" And usually there was some one wise enough to tell this philosopher, "You're about right there, sir," in hearty tones. 2. He had his bad days. There was, for example, that trouble with the river. He made little boats out of whole newspapers, an art he learnt by watching the Spender boy, and he set them sailing down the stream, great paper cocked hats. When they vanished under the bridge which marks the boundary of the strictly private grounds about Eyebright House, he would give a great shout and would run round and across Tormat's new field. Lord, how Tormat's pigs did scamper, to be sure, and turn their good fat into lean muscle! And so to meet his boats by the ford. Right across the nearer lawns these paper boats of his used to go, right in front of Eyebright House, right under Lady Wondershoot's eyes, disorganizing folded newspaper, a pretty thing. Gathering enterprise from impunity, he began babyish hydraulic engineering. He delved a huge port for his paper fleets, with an old shed door that served him as a spade, and, no one chancing to observe his operations just then, he devised an ingenious canal that incidentally flooded Lady Wondershoot's ice house, and finally he dammed the river. He dammed it right across with a few vigorous doorfuls of earth. He must have worked like an avalanche, and down came a most amazing spate through the shrubbery and washed away Miss Spinks and her easel and the most promising water-colour sketch she had ever begun. Or, at any rate, it washed away her easel and left her wet to the knees and dismally tucked up in flight to the house. And thence the waters rushed through the kitchen garden, and so by the green door into the lane and down into the river bed, again by a short stitch. Meanwhile the vicar, interrupted in conversation with the blacksmith, was amazed to see distressful stranded fish leaping out of a few residual pools, and heaped green weed in the bed of the stream, where 10 minutes before there had been 8 feet or more of clear cool water. After that, horrified at his own consequences, young Cattles fled his home for 2 days and nights. He returned only at the insistent call of hunger, to bear with stoical calm an amount of violent scolding that was more in proportion to his size than anything else that had ever before fallen to his lot in the happy village. 3. Immediately after that affair, Lady Wondershoot, casting about for exemplary additions to the abuse and fasting she had inflicted, issued an ukase. She issued it first to her butler, and very suddenly, so that she made him jump. He was clearing away the breakfast things, and she was staring out of the tall window in the terrace, where the fawns would come to be fed. "Jobbet," she said, in her most imperial voice, "Jobbet, this thing must work for its living." And she made it quite clear not only to Jobbet, which was easy, but to every one else in the village, including young Candles, that in this matter, as in all things, she meant what she said. "Keep him employed," said Lady Wondershoot. "That's the tip for Master Cattles." "It's the tip, I fancy, for all humanity," said the vicar. "The simple duties, the modest round, seed time and harvest." "Exactly," said Lady Wondershoot. "What I always say. Satan finds some mischief still for idle hands to do. At any rate, among the labouring classes. We bring up our under housemaids on that principle, always. What shall we set him to do?" That was a little difficult. They thought of many things, and meanwhile they broke him in to labour a bit by using him instead of a horse messenger to carry telegrams and notes when extra speed was needed, and he also carried luggage and packing cases, and things of that sort very conveniently in a big net they found for him. He seemed to like employment, regarding it as a sort of game, and Kinkle, Lady Wondershoot's agent, seeing him shift a rockery for her one day, was struck by the brilliant idea of putting him into her chalk quarry at Thursley Hanger, hard by Hickley Brow. The idea was carried out, and it seemed they had settled his problem. He worked in the chalk pit, at first with the zest of a playing child, and afterwards with an effective habit, delving, loading, doing all the haulage of the trucks, running the full ones down the lines towards the siding, and hauling the empty ones up by the wire of a great windlass, working the entire quarry at least single-handed. I am told that Kinkle made a very good thing indeed out of him for Lady Wondershoot. consuming as he did scarcely anything but his food, though that never restrained her denunciation of the creature as a gigantic parasite upon her charity. At that time he used to wear a sort of smock of sacking, trousers of patched leather, and iron-shod sabots. Over his head was sometimes a queer thing, a worn-out beehive straw chair it was, but usually he went bareheaded. He would be moving about the pit with a powerful deliberation, and the vicar on his constitutional round would get there about midday to find him shamefully eating his vast need of food with his back to all the world. His food was brought to him every day, a mess of grain in the husk, in a truck, a small railway truck, like one of the trucks he was perpetually filling with chalk, and this load he used to char in on an old lime kiln and then devour. Sometimes he would mix it with a bag of sugar. Sometimes he would sit licking a lump of such salt as is given to cows, or eating a huge lump of dates, stones and all, such as one sees in London on barrows. For drink he walked to the rivulet beyond the burnt-out side of the experimental farm at Hickley Brow, and put down his face to the stream. It was from his drinking in that way, after eating, that the food of the gods did at last get loose, spreading first of all in huge weeds from the riverside, then in big frogs, bigger trout, and stranding carp, and at last in a fantastic exuberance of vegetation all over the little valley. And after a year or so the queer monstrous grub things in the field before the blacksmiths grew so big and developed into such frightful skipjacks and cockchafers, motor cockchafers the boys called them, that they drove Lady One to shoot abroad. 4. But soon the food was to enter upon a new phase of its work in him. In spite of the simple instructions of the vicar, instructions intended to round off the modest natural life befitting a giant peasant in the most complete and final manner, he began to ask questions, to inquire into things, to think. As he grew from boyhood to adolescence, it became increasingly evident that his mind had processes of its own, out of the vicar's control. The vicar did his best to ignore this distressing phenomenon, but still he could feel it there. The young giant's material for thought lay about him. Quite involuntarily, with his spacious views, his constant overlooking of things, he must have seen a good deal of human life, and as it grew clearer to him that he too, save for his clumsy greatness of his, was also human, he must have come to realize more and more just how much was shut against him by his melancholy distinction. The sociable hum of the school, the mystery of religion that was partaken in such finery, and which exhaled so sweet a strain of melody, the jovial carousing from the inn, the warmly glowing rooms, candle-lit and fire-lit, into which he peered out of the darkness, or again the shouting excitement, the vicar of flannelled exercise upon some imperfectly understood issue that centred about the cricket-field. All these things must have cried aloud to his companionable heart. It would seem that as his adolescence crept upon him, he began to take a very considerable interest in the proceedings of lovers, in those preferences and pairings, those close intimacies that are so cardinal in life. One Sunday, just about that hour when the stars and the bats and the passions of rural life come out, there chanced to be a young couple kissing each other a bit in Love Lane, the deep hedge lane that runs out back towards the upper lodge. They were giving their little emotions play, as secure in the warm still twilight as any lovers could be. The only conceivable interruption they thought possible must come passing visibly up the lane. The 12-foot hedge towards the silent downs seemed to them an absolute guarantee. Then suddenly, incredibly, they were lifted and drawn apart. They discovered themselves held up, each with a finger and thumb under the armpits, and with the perplexed brown eyes of young cattle scanning their warm flushed faces. They were naturally dumb with the emotions of their situation. "Why do you like doing that?" asked young Cattles. I gather the embarrassment continued until the swain, remembering his manhood, vehemently, with loud shouts, threats, and virile blasphemies, such as became the occasion, bade young Cattles under penalties put them down. Whereupon young Cattles, remembering his manners, did put them down politely and very carefully, and conveniently near for a resumption of their embraces, and having hesitated above them for a while, vanished again into the twilight. "But I felt precious silly," the swain confided to me. "We couldn't 'ardly look at one another, being caught like that. Kissing we was, you know, and the curious thing is she blamed it all on to me," said the swain. "Flew out something outrageous, and wouldn't 'ardly speak to me all the way home." The giant was embarking upon investigations, there could be no doubt. His mind, it became manifest, was throwing up questions. He put them to few people as yet, but they troubled him. His mother, one gathers, sometimes came in for cross-examination. He used to come into the yard behind his mother's cottage, and, after a careful inspection of the ground for hens and chicks, he would sit down slowly with his back against the barn. In a minute the chicks, who liked him, would be pecking all over him at the mossy chalk mud in the seams of his clothing, and if it was blowing up for wet, Mrs. Cattle's kitten, who never lost her confidence in him, would assume a sinuous form and start scampering into the cottage, up to the kitchen fender. round out, up his leg, up his body, right up to his shoulder, meditated a moment, and then scat back again, and so on.